As the UAE assumes the presidency of the Security Council for the month of March, we're really humbled by the responsibility of this role. We take over from the Russian presidency, who presided over the council for the month of February, and I think we can all say that they conducted themselves professionally and with full respect to the rules of procedure of the Security Council, and the UAE will very much follow in that vein. Just to give you an overview of what we have done on our first day, we began our presidency earlier today with the adoption of the program of work by the council members. And before I address that program of work, I would like to also touch on the obvious, which I know is going to be a subject that many of you will ask me about. We are obviously assuming the presidency at a time of immense global turbulence, and there are a number of crises, both on the Council agenda, but also currently in Europe. And we anticipate additional requests for meetings, not currently on this program of work. And of course, as President, we will do our best to facilitate those meetings. Again, this is a place where diplomacy and dialogue needs to happen, and we have left room in the program of work for those meetings to take place if requested by council members. With regards to that topic of Ukraine, and speaking in my national capacity, I would like to address it at the outset again of the conference because I know it's top of mind for many of you. The UAE, as you'll have seen in our explanation of votes in the Security Council, has called for a cessation of hostilities, for de-escalation, dialogue, and for diplomacy and negotiation. Earlier today, we also announced $5 million US dollars as a donation to the Humanitarian Flash Appeal to benefit all the civilians impacted by this conflict. And we're encouraged by and support reports that talks are underway between the parties, and we will continue ourselves to remain in touch with the parties and to encourage a diplomatic off-ramp to this crisis. Speaking as President of the Council, we will manage the program of work with the flexibility that I mentioned and that the current moment also demands, while addressing other ongoing crises and situations around the world, as well as the program of work of the Council. So to give you a little bit of a sense of the program of work for the Council, I know many of you will have already seen it because journalists always seem to get documents before Council members in New York. That's a testament to your excellent journalistic skills. But we plan to hold 3 signature events that correlate with our Council priorities and that we campaigned on. The first is on women, peace and security and the partnerships that need to happen in that domain. The second is on climate security. And the third is on the cooperation between the UN Security Council and the League of Arab States. So on the first signature event, our presidency will reflect the UAE's commitment to making the women, peace and security agenda a top priority. And the UAE, alongside Albania, Brazil and Norway, has signed a statement of shared commitments, a statement of intent, if you like, to advance the implementation of the WPS agenda, including women's full, equal and meaningful participation in all council meetings, and the inclusion of gender perspectives in council meetings and products. So building on this shared commitment, we'll convene a high-level open debate that will be chaired by our Minister Miriam Al-Muhairi, our Minister of Climate Change and Environment, on 8th of March to coincide with International Women's Day. So we hope that we will have your interest in that event. The focus of this, and in order not to repeat ground that has already been covered both in the Security Council but in the relevant discussions, the focus will be on the importance of women's economic inclusion and public-private partnerships for the prevention of conflict and for post-conflict recovery. And so we look forward to hearing from the confirmed briefers, UN Women Executive Director Sima Bahous and also IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva in what we are going to attempt to make sure is a results-driven briefing focusing on concrete actions to be taken by all stakeholders. And they'll also be joined by a civil society briefer whose name we cannot disclose in advance as part of our commitment to the security and safety of civil society briefers. Second, climate change remains one of our most pressing global challenges. The Secretary General said this himself after the latest IPCC report, which described the report as an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. And I think that's the Secretary General being as strong as he has about any other issue and really bringing it to the forefront of our attention. The UAE itself has been at the forefront in my national capacity here of tackling this challenge, including regarding its links to peace and security. And so, of course, although this has been sometimes a contentious issue in the climate discussions in the Council, we intend to keep it trickling over in Council debate because we think it's too important to ignore. And as the UAE, we're looking forward to hosting COP28 in 2023, which we'll strive to make as inclusive and action-oriented as possible. And we think there's a real opportunity, despite the failure to adopt the resolution last December, we think there's a real opportunity for the Security Council to make tangible progress in so many contexts where we acknowledge this climate security nexus. But it does require some hard work. It does require some bridge building. And here I'd like to acknowledge the UK's successful hosting of COP26. And of course, we hope for a very successful COP27 under Egypt's able leadership. So to that end, the UAE is organizing an Area Formula meeting on 9th of March. That will be chaired by Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE's Special Envoy for Climate Change and Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology. And the meeting will explore how to support climate finance efforts to build and sustain peace and conflict, crisis and post-conflict situations, as well as outline potential next steps in coordination between both climate and security actors over the next 12 months. And we'll be providing a summary of the key recommendations that emerge from this meeting and circulating it as a UN document. I would also like to note that this meeting, with the full approval of all Council members, will be webcast and therefore reach a wider audience, and I think that's a positive step. And lastly, the UAE will host a briefing on 23rd of March to discuss how the United Nations and the League of Arab States can advance regional stability through this enhanced coordination and cooperation on the many challenges facing the Arab region. And of course, as we hear here often in the debates, regional and sub-regional organizations do play a critical role in the maintenance of international peace and security. That meeting will be chaired by His Excellency Khalifa Al-Shaheen, our Minister of State at the Foreign Ministry, who is responsible for the Arab file portfolio and also the OIC, and it will feature the participation of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, as well as the League of Arab States Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghait, and a youth representative also will be invited to speak on behalf of the 60% of our region that is under the age of 30. So bringing the youth voice to the Council is very much part of our commitment as the United Arab Emirates. And in addition to these signature events, the Security Council will meet on the ongoing situations in Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, and Afghanistan. We will hold a briefing with the chairperson in office of the OSCE, briefings on Sudan, so UNITAMS, the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO, and a meeting on Resolution 2334 concerning Israeli settlements. We'll also have scheduled adoptions on Sudan, DPRK, Unama in Afghanistan, AMISOM in Somalia, the Somalia Piracy Resolution, and UNMISS in South Sudan. So a light agenda for March. The UAE is committed to making information on the Council's work very visible and accessible to all of you. We'll continue the tradition started by Norway at the start of this year to maintain an updated, unofficial, interactive calendar on our website for this month, containing information on all formal and informal activities of the Council. And we're also pleased to announce that the program of work will also be made available in Arabic for the first time. We're committed to the effective and efficient functioning of the Council as the UAE and as the President, and as such, we will strive for a balance between open and closed formats to promote transparency, while also ensuring the formats that are best suited to facilitate specific discussions. And of course, we're very committed to sharing information with the press, and during our presidency, we look forward to interacting with as many of you as would like, as much as possible, through our spokesperson, through myself, my two deputies, Mohammed Abu Shahab, Ambassador Mohammed Abu Shahab, and Amir Al-Hafaiti, and through our media team. So please feel free to reach out at all times, and we will do our best to supply you with the information that you need. And we're very grateful for the job that you do both here in New York, but also around the world, providing all of us with information as events happen on the ground. So thank you. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Continuing with the UN's tradition, we'd of course like to start with the President of UNCA, Valeria. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ambassador, on behalf of ANCA for this press conference. Valeria Robeco from ANSA Newswire. My question is on Ukraine. You abstained from the last two draft resolution in the Security Council. Now there is another one on the humanitarian situation. My question is, what's your position on this draft, and if you plan to call the vote soon? Thank you so much.
Sure, we'll take a couple more. So I see Philippe was next.
Thank you very much, Philippe Rater, Agence France Presse. Yeah, je suis là. Hello. My question also is on the resolution from France. Do you expect a vote today? Because France wanted to have a vote today. Do you think it's still possible, or it would be tomorrow? If you can tell us also if you are going to abstain also at the GA tomorrow morning at 10. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. And it's always nice to see women in that seat. Question on outcomes. For your 3 signature meetings, are you expecting to produce either a presidential statement, resolution, and also, could you please comment on the announcement today of a new transitional government in Libya, which was confirmed by Libyan lawmakers headed by Prime Minister-designate Bashagha, which does set up the prospect of 2 rival administrations and a return to possible conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll take that number and then come back to everybody else. So first of all, on Ukraine, I think the UAE position, as expressed in our explanation of votes on both occasions, is very reflective of our foreign policy. And that position is to call for de-escalation, call for dialogue, call for diplomacy to be at the forefront of both the Security Council but also the international community's efforts in this crisis. So I think that we need to keep channels open. I think we need to urge, as I said in our explanation of vote, for a cessation of hostilities. I think we need to ensure unhindered humanitarian access for humanitarian actors, and also that everyone is allowed safe passage who wants to leave Ukraine. So those have been our priorities. Today at the UN Humanitarian Flash Appeal Fund for Ukraine, we announced a donation of $5 million for those in need in Ukraine, and we will continue to monitor the situation as the UAE, and that's the question that was posed to me, was in my capacity as the UAE, just to be clear. But as President of the Council, of course, we expect that this issue will remain on the Council's agenda in an ad hoc way, that meetings will be called. We've already heard of some Council members wanting to call for further meetings on Ukraine. This is to be expected for as long as the crisis continues. And as President, we will follow strictly the rules of procedure and the guiding practice of the Council. So you will see us follow the rule book in terms of presiding over those meetings. In terms of the votes happening in the coming days, you mentioned the humanitarian draft text on humanitarian resolution in the Security Council. I think that from what I've understood, they may want more time for consultation at the moment. So from what I've understood, experts will be meeting on that text and will be discussing it. And all countries and the Council who are interested in the humanitarian situation in Ukraine are, of course, engaging on that text. But, of course, any initiative by France is very welcome in order to alleviate any civilian suffering on the ground, and is something that I think the Council will look at in due course. With respect to the General Assembly vote tomorrow, there are, I believe, a number of countries who've co-sponsored. Countries are still looking at text. There are still suggestions around text. So I would say that it's a fluid situation insofar as the vote will happen tomorrow, and I believe it's scheduled for 10 a.m. But in terms of country positions, I think you'll see that evolving throughout the course of the day. With regards to the question from Edith, first of all, on meeting outcomes, a very wise former president of the council once told me, the minute you announce you want an outcome from a meeting, you can be sure you're never going to get it. So taking that lesson in mind, I think the only outcome that we are announcing is the PRST after the cooperation meeting between the League of Arab States and the UN. And that builds on the work already done by previous Arab members of the Security Council. And of course, we represent that group as well as representing the entire membership who voted for us. So I think a PRST from the last UN meeting will be worked on in due course. And for the other two meetings, products are not planned. But of course, we are one of the either lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, countries that get two chances at the presidency. And we believe very much in building up work in a systematic way so that we can build on it for our second presidency. So I think on the other two topics, you will see us lay some groundwork there. And then with regards to Libya, Ambassador Mohammed Bouchab, I don't know if you'd like to take that question.
Sure. So look, I think for us, we'd like to see a obviously Libyan-led and Libyan-owned process. I think the focus should be on ensuring that the parliamentary and presidential elections take place, and we will do what we can to assist the UN process, which is where we put our full support.
Thank you. First Rida, then Abdul Hamid, then you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Rida Bouchafra from Sky News Arabiya. I have a couple of questions, if you allow, regarding yesterday's resolution on Yemen, which described the Houthi militia as a terrorist group for the first time from the Security Council. How will it affect the conflict in the region, mainly with the terrorist attacks against civilians of this militia inside and outside Yemen? Second question. There has been today a phone call between Abu Dhabi Deputy Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. We all know that the UAE abstained from the vote recently twice in regard to the conflict in Ukraine. Will there be any mediation between Russia and Ukraine from UAE? And last question on Syria. It's not a secret that Turkey is occupying large territories in northern Syria. They raise their flags. They use the Turkish currency there, and there is a Turkish military presence in these occupied territories in Syria. My question, why the international community is not condemning the Turkish occupation in Syria and northern Iraq, because it is the same thing in northern Iraq, same way they are doing with Russian operation in Ukraine? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Ambassador Nusseibeh. We are proud of you, and we're happy to see qualified Arab women in this position. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi, that is based in London. And my question to you in your capacity as the representative of UAE. Just 2 hours ago, another Palestinian was shot and killed in Beit Fajjar, south of Bethlehem. The Israelis had never been so bold in their campaign against the Palestinians more than they did after the Abraham Accord. We thought, and your country expressed it eloquently, that with this peace accord, they will be better off for Palestinians. There will be more chances for the Israeli to feel at ease. They are accepted around the Arab world, and that might reflect positively on the Palestinians. But exactly the opposite happened. The campaign to gun down Palestinians, to confiscate more land, to bulldoze more houses, and I'm sure you heard the last report by Mr. Winsland, So do you see that as, can you tell us how you're going to use this peace accord with Israel to help reach a peaceful settlement where Palestinians can see their independent, contiguous, sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital? Thank you.
So, Ambassador, just one more from him, and then we'll turn
Thank
to
you.
you.
It's Ben Schwinghammer, the German press agency, DPA. We touched on your abstention in the Security Council on Friday already, but your explanation of the vote on Friday was that the UAE is committed to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of all member states of the United Nations. Ukraine is a member state, so why did you abstain?
Okay, I'll start with the questions in the order they came. The first was on Yemen. I think yesterday was a groundbreaking resolution in the adoption of the Yemen sanctions renewal, which designated, as you saw, the Houthis as a terrorist group and imposed an arms embargo on them. And I think it was a signal to the outside world that the Security Council is united, first of all, in condemning terrorist attacks, which happened in the UAE against civilians and civilian infrastructure, and also happens quite frequently in Saudi Arabia. And so the Security Council is saying that they are holding the Houthis accountable for those cross-border attacks and that they have crossed a very clear red line, and the Council is committed to addressing that red line. So I think that's the essence of the resolution. It is now an arms embargo on the Houthis. It's also the designation of the Houthis under the Yemen sanctions renewal, and it's the description of them as a terrorist group. Those are the main takeaways from the Yemen sanctions renewal, and it received widespread support. Building on that, of course, and as I said in my explanation of vote, it is the UAE's belief that there is no military solution to the conflict in Yemen, that the political process must be reinvigorated under the UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, and we invited him to brief the Council about 10 days ago under an AOB, any other business item, to share updates on his progress for his framework or his roadmap. But clearly he needs more leverage, and clearly there needs to be more of a mechanism to incentivize the Houthis to stop committing cross-border terrorist attacks and to focus instead on a political process. And of course, it's not only the Houthis and the government of Yemen, the legitimate government of Yemen, but there has to be other incorporation of other players in the Yemeni scene. At the end of the day, this has got to be a Yemeni-led, Yemeni process that they choose for their country, in the same way that Ambassador Mohammed Bouchab commented on Libya. I think that's very much our role, also as an Arab member of the Council, to encourage the file holder to help shape Council discourse. So that is the essence of the resolution yesterday. It's a strong, united signal from the Security Council condemning the cross-border terrorist attacks committed by the Houthis, designating them as a terrorist entity, and imposing an arms embargo on them. Now, you raised the very important question of humanitarian impact, and there was much discussion in the Council around this, and Council members, including the UAE, were rightly concerned about a financial asset freeze potentially impacting commercial activity or humanitarian aid. The humanitarian aid actors, as you know, are concerned about that. And those considerations were taken into account, and that is why there's no financial assets freeze within this sanctions renewal. Now, it's not to say that there may not be in the future if they continue to behave in this way, but it's to say that for now, this resolution doesn't impact in any way the already grave humanitarian situation on the ground in Yemen that we are all a part of the solution for. So that's on Yemen. You asked about the phone call between His Highness the Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and President Vladimir Putin. What I can share with you is that the call happened earlier this morning, that the situation in Ukraine was touched upon, and in the same vein as we have called for de-escalation in our statements, that call for de-escalation was made. Of course, as a major oil-producing country and as a member of the BRIC Plus, of the OPEC Plus, BRIC Plus at a later date, as a member of the OPEC Plus, the impact of this crisis on potential energy supply, global energy supply, was also rightly discussed because, of course, in the coming months, I think we are going to see a very serious consequences on the global economy, on energy supply, on the prices of oil and gas that we use in our everyday lives, and that's going to affect everyday people here and around the world. So that was also touched upon, and that's as much of a readout as I have of the call. But I think it's important, stepping back a little bit, and this comes back to the question again on our abstention, which I believe was asked and answered, but I will answer it again in this vein, in the context of the phone call. Of course, this is an important crisis, and we must all address it. But at the same time, we must leave space for a diplomatic off-ramp. What we are seeing right now is understandably escalation and a lot of intensity around the subject. But I think channels must remain open, and those countries that did abstain have those channels with President Putin. And we'll use them to help and support in whatever way we can. So that is generally, as I said, part and parcel of the UAE's foreign policy to try and this is not in my capacity as president, but this is part and parcel of the UAE's foreign policy to try and assist, and I think we'll continue to do that in whatever way we can on this file. I was also asked about Palestine and the Abraham Accords. Look, I think that it's important to note that the vision of the Abraham Accords was part of a vision of a more accepting, open, regional environment that again would allow the space for dialogue and diplomacy. At the end of the day, though, I think the Abraham Accords was never promised as a replacement for what has to happen with regards to the Palestinian question, and that is a bilateral negotiation between the Palestinians and the Israelis on the two-state solution. And the UAE, in our, again, national capacity here, fully supports the Arab League position on this, the two-state solution, and all the international norms, frameworks, and resolutions vis-a-vis that. And so I think that is what we will pursue as a council member. But of course, we now have a bilateral relationship with Israel that helps us influence diplomacy in a positive direction, we hope, for the wider region, but also that has intense economic and entrepreneurial and positive social impacts on the wider region. You know, we're a country of 200 nationalities, all faiths. We now have the Abrahamic family house, a synagogue, a church, and a mosque in the same place where people can come and worship. This is the vision of a rich tapestry of the Middle East in a country like ours that we wish to see multiplied across the region, because it's a vision of hope and tolerance for the more than 60% of Arab youth in our region who are under the age of 30 and who are looking for an end to conflict being the permanent news cycle on their news channels. Everyone is tired of conflict. They want the same things that people want around the world, which is the chance for economic opportunity, to build a life for their families, to educate their children, and to live in acceptance of each other. And I think that's what drove the Abraham Accords, and we see those benefits reaping in the bilateral relationship in spaces as varied as technology, food and water security, innovation, and I think that hopefully will have a ripple effect for the economic opportunities for Arab youth in our region. But at the same time, as I said, holding to our Arab League position that the two-state solution must be achieved, and hopefully achieved in the near future, to resolve the situation and to create a Palestinian state on international borders, internationally recognized and agreed borders. On the question for Syria, I think Ambassador Mohammed, you'd like to take that?
Sure. So, look, I mean, I think the conflict has gone on for more than 10 years. Hundreds of thousands killed, 13 million Syrians displaced. We are trying to look at ways that the dynamic changes. We're trying to look at ways that the engagement on this file can shift in order to assist the UN envoy to be able to make progress in his plan. And, you know, while the UAE is not co-pen holder on the Syria file, we still want to play a constructive role and try to bring the Council to make some progress, and like I say, to support the UN envoy.
Thank you. I see.
Question about the abstention was not answered.
Ambassador, if you'd like to take the question that he asked on why the UAE abstained on Ukraine.
I explained that we want to see a diplomatic off-ramp to this crisis, that we want to create the space for dialogue and diplomacy, that we've called for a cessation of hostilities, but we didn't think that this resolution was the pathway to achieving that. And having said that, we will look at all texts and all resolutions on their merit. This is not a one-position approach. We want to be flexible in our diplomacy, and I think that's what we're demonstrating.
Thank you. Team, due to time constraints, we'll only take two from here. So, sir, you in the blue jacket, and then Majid, and then we'll turn to our virtual colleagues.
Benny Avni of New York Sun. Hello. So, according to reports from Vienna, they are very close to concluding the Iran nuclear deal, or renewal of the Iran nuclear deal. So, two questions, since it might fall during your presidency, do you think there needs to be another Security Council resolution on it? And secondly, can you tell us a little bit more about what the UAE approach to the renewal of the deal?
Majid?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador. I have two questions. The first one is a follow-up to my colleague's question regarding Turkey's military activities in northern Iraq and also in Syria. Iraqi government multiple times complained about this formally to Security Council and to UN secretariats, and also the Syrian government. Do you support any action at the council level or any other way to, in order to support Iraq's protests in terms of Turkey's bombardment and military activities that still continues? Even yesterday there was shelling. And my second question is about.
Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Majid. So I also saw Evelyn. Evelyn?
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Ambassador, sorry, one cannot. The UAE is a major oil producer. How do you square that with your very active stance on climate change? How can you bring the two together and at the same time continue producing so much oil which finances your economy? Thank you.
So I think the first question was around the JCPOA, and the answer in terms of whether there needs to be council action is not clear from those primarily concerned with the JCPOA themselves. So we are in discussions. I think someone's phone is ringing. So we're in discussions with those primary file holders. And of course, if it needs to come back to the Security Council, we will be ready under our presidency to address what is needed as president of the Council. And I think the other question was, did I answer the question sufficiently?
No, I also asked the UAE position on the
Thank you. So in my capacity as the UAE now, we don't have a position on round 2 of the JCPOA or JCPOA plus. The first JCPOA, we were also not involved with in it as a party to the negotiations or asked for a view. It's the same process this time around. I think what we've expressed both privately and publicly is that the JCPOA, and this is well understood by all the parties, the JCPOA addresses one part of Iran's presence in the region, but it doesn't address the other parts of Iran's presence in the region that we think are necessary for a stable and secure regional environment, and our foreign policy is very much predicated on that stable and secure regional environment, on de-escalation and on reaching out. And those, as you know, are around the ballistic missiles acquisition and then the use of those missiles by proxy groups around the region. And of course, that has to be addressed as well as part of a confidence-building measures approach in the region once and if the JCPOA plus is concluded. So we have no view of the JCPOA. We will be informed when the final agreement is reached or not reached. But I think what is clear is that it will not address a very turbulent regional security environment and a very stressed regional security architecture. And as a UAE is the model of economic openness and all nationalities living safely in the country, and that's part of the reason why we condemned the Houthi attacks on the UAE so roundly. It's because people insist quite rightly on living in safe and secure countries. And we think that behavior also has to stop and has to be addressed in a future discussion. So I think that's very much part of the broader regional discussion. On the bilateral side, of course, we reach out, we talk, there's dialogue and communication vis-a-vis areas where we can talk to each other around. But we want Iran, like we want all countries in the region, to aspire in the same way that we do to a safe and stable and peaceful regional security environment. And we hope that is the path that Iran, as well as other countries in the region, take. Yeah.
Just again on the question on Turkish presence in Iraq. I mean, look, there is an Arab group position that has rejected Turkey's presence in Iraq. But when it comes to the Security Council, there is, as you know, for action to be taken, there's a certain structure in the Security Council, and you have to get a certain number of countries on board for that action. So we will certainly work to assist Iraq, but within the possible, within the structure of the UN Security Council.
And I'll just answer Evelyn. So we think it is one of the remarkable success stories in our country that we are a hydrocarbon economy that well over a decade ago pursued with full speed the importance of the green energy revolution that we all see coming and we all see as very much necessary. So we think that's actually one of the strengths of the proposition that we put forward, that as a hydrocarbon economy, we host the International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi, an intergovernmental agency with near universal membership, where we look at these issues daily and regularly, but also that we very much in our energy portfolio pursue clean energy and green energy with the same commitment and using the investment from hydrocarbons to pursue that technology and be a leader in that space. So we are hosting COP28. We've been a big part of the discussions in COP26, and we will be as well in COP27 with Egypt. We're very committed to this. We think it's an existential crisis for humanity. And the UAE is both a South country, but also as a hydrocarbon economy, but also as a country that feels very passionate about climate and clean energy. We think we can play our part, and we will play our part. So we don't see that as a contradiction. We see that as an area of strength.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sorry, we don't have any questions from our virtual colleagues, so I will take one more question. Talal.
Thank you, thank you, Shahad, and thank you, Ambassador. Just two clarification points with regard to the Houthis. Are they going to be referred to as the Houthi terrorist groups in future United Nations Security Council resolutions? And the second point, which I'm not really clear about, the arms embargo. Wasn't there an arms embargo on Yemen before? And the Houthis get their weapons smuggled from a certain country. What difference does it make to have another arms embargo? Thank you.
Ambassador, that's all the time you have, unfortunately. You, okay, Ibtisam, and then the lady in the red.
Thank you, Shahid, and thank you, Ambassador. Mabruk for your presidency. I have a follow-up on the Yemen issue. You talked about the fact that the Houthi attacks against your country and against Saudi Arabia should be addressed, and that's rightly so. But some would say also that your country is part of the coalition and carried attacks out that were responsible for killing civilians, and there was no apology, and you believe that such things should be also discussed in the Security Council. And on Yemen too, and
sorry,
on
just
the
one question, because
it's just on the Yemen humanitarian issue, because the humanitarian situation is so dire there, and your country did cut. I mean, you were paying in the past years a lot of money to the humanitarian fund, to the UN, but you did cut these payments in the last few years. And some would say that maybe this is coming as a tool for the fact, or punishment for the fact that many people who get these assistance live in Houthi areas. So your comment on that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador, for having this. I'm Yuki from NHK Japan Broadcasting Corporation. My question is also on arms embargo, but this one is about Myanmar. So I think last week, the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar issued a report mentioned that 3 countries, including 2 permanent members of the Security Council, is selling weapons to military junta in Myanmar. So yesterday we saw that the Security Council actually can unite on passing a resolution to suspend Houthi from getting weapons. Do you think it's a good timing for the Council to start discuss having a resolution and ban and suspend any weapons from selling to Myanmar junta and using against civilian? And if your answer is no, could you please tell us the reason and what's UAE and other members' position on this issue? Thank you.
Last question from George. That's all.
Far afield as Georgia and Kazakhstan. I have one very small procedural question, which is you mentioned, Madam President, that one of your 3 major thrusts is going to be on climate. It's not clear to me which day that is exactly. I don't see the word climate anywhere on this program of work.
Okay, I'll take that. The climate area formula meeting is scheduled for the 9th of March. Yeah, the area formula meeting. So that's just to answer that question, George. Talal, good to see you as always. You know, I think that the difference of the arms embargo is it's on the entire group as an entity. Before we were going through the process of individual designations, and I think we'd reached about 9 at that point. It's a very slow process. Now it's very clear that the supply of arms to the Houthi group as an entity falls under the arms embargo. And of course, all of this is based on the panel of experts report on Yemen, which if you haven't read and you are interested in the Yemen file, I really urge you to read in close detail. There was much in that report that we also wanted, frankly, along with the UK, the penholder, and other countries concerned with the Yemen file, to also put into this resolution to prevent more arms going. But of course, diplomacy is about compromise. But I think this arms embargo is a first step, dealing with the Houthis as a group, to prevent the supply and sales of any military equipment to the Houthis as a group and not individuals. Secondly, so I think it's a very robust regime, and I think it's been actually described as a groundbreaking moment in the Yemen process, in the Yemen sanctions process. So that's the first question. Well, your second question, Talal, was... Are we going to refer to the Houthi as a... Yes, so in future products, yes. So the resolution, of course, as you know, the Security Council can be an unpredictable place, but it is also a normative, norm-setting body in the documentation. The Council members have passed in this resolution that the Houthis are a terrorist group for the acts that they have committed, and I think that's also a step change. And that leads to, and should be referred to as such in future products. That leads to, and should I say also, but at the same time allowing the space for the envoy to conduct political negotiations. And I think that leads to the second question on Yemen. You know, the UAE stepped out of being part of the coalition, as you know, in 2019. The UAE's also been, along with Saudi Arabia, at the forefront of humanitarian assistance to Yemen well before this crisis, and I think well into the future. Almost $10 billion have been given to the situation in Yemen. And of course, the UAE's presence predates that in cooperation with partners like the United States around tackling al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and that remains a top priority. I think no one wants to see a vacuum appear in Yemen, which we're already seeing, where terrorist groups could get a foothold and conduct attacks across the region and more globally. So Yemen remains very much high on the agenda. With regards to the question around the coalition, you know, military operations are always a choice of last resort for countries, and I think that the coalition has committed itself to applying the highest standards and benchmarks of operating procedures in the military theater, and fully investigates anything that surfaces that doesn't apply to those standards, and reports the results of those findings. So that is the commitment from the coalition from the outset. And I'll ask, do you want to take the question on Myanmar? I can take it. You can take the question on Myanmar? Okay, great. Amira.
First, good afternoon. We are pleased to have to be with you today. If you can't hear me, I can take my mask off. Sorry. Okay, so the Council is clearly concerned about the situation in Myanmar, and as you know that for any action needed from the Security Council, it needs to be discussed and agreed upon. The great things that achieved this month was a press statement where the Council spoke in one voice regarding many elements. I would just mention a few of them. You know, all of them are actually in agreement when it comes to the dire humanitarian situation, the need to put an end to the violence, and of course how important it is to, you know, de-escalate and come to bring back the dialogue. Everyone, I would say, council members, very highly supportive of the ASEAN, and we want to give also space for that efforts to bear fruit. When it comes to also the Rohingya, which is a very important issue for us as well, that we will continue to advocate for, not just as a council member, but also as a UAE and also through the OIC. These are the important elements that the council really were able to speak in one voice, but any other actions, of course, will need to be discussed and agreed upon, and there are always room for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you all for joining us here today. I just wanted to say that this isn't the last time that we will have an interaction, and please do get in contact throughout the month, and we will definitely share updates throughout. Thank you so much.
I think there's some online. Oh, well, we'll stay with the online, you know, because we feel bad that you're logged in. But if you,
I wanted to ask a question as well, if you don't mind.
Can we take two more questions? One online, and of course one from you, please.
Okay, for one question from those online, I see
the mission spokesperson is about to officially shoot the three of us. I think.
Go ahead.
Hello, this is Iftikhar Ali from Associated Press of Pakistan. Ambassador, do you support Secretary General's call for the release of full frozen funds of Afghanistan? Do you support that in your capacity as UAE ambassador?
Please.
Thank you, Ambassador, and congratulations. My question is about the French-Mexican draft resolution on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Have you received the text? Are you, in principle, supportive for such a resolution? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and those, I promise, will be the final two questions, Shahad. Okay. No, for the question on Afghanistan, so of course a big part of the program of work this month will be the renewal of the Unama mandate. And so Norway just distributed their zero draft for that yesterday. And of course, there are many issues to be discussed in that are important. And I think countries' positions on that are evolving. But of course, the position adopted in December in response to the dire humanitarian situation in Afghanistan and its impact on human lives, I think was a good moment for the Security Council because it allowed the vital work of humanitarian actors to continue in humanitarian aid. Now, at the same time, there's a number of sequencing steps that need to be taken vis-a-vis Afghanistan. And to be frank, countries are in different places on that, whether revolving around recognition, whether revolving around financial flows, whether revolving around the economy. And of course, for our country, and I'm speaking now in our national capacity, for us, the primacy of protecting the hard-gained rights for women and girls in Afghanistan remains a fundamental priority, and it's something that we always raise in our council discussions, but also with the special envoy there, Deborah Lyons. So it's a complex situation, and there is no one single answer, but we, of course, have to make sure that the de facto control and authorities also respect the rights of women and girls in terms of education. And we also have to make sure that Afghanistan, again, doesn't become a safe haven for terrorism and extremism to be exported around the world. So those are things that are top of mind as we look at the Unama renewal, and will, of course, as President, try and help Norway as penholder on that come to a strong, robust mechanism for Unama. And we think that's very important because the UN is doing groundbreaking and important work on the ground in Afghanistan, and it's very much needed. It's a crisis in the making that is very worrying. And from our UAE capacity, we've donated more than 485 tons of humanitarian aid, and we've assisted in the evacuation of over 40,000 individuals from Afghanistan who've requested that support. So clearly that's not a tenable situation, and we are still getting requests all the time from Afghans, particularly women who want to leave the country, and we need to find a stabilizing factor in the Afghanistan situation quickly. And we support the calls that the Secretary General has made for injecting liquidity into the Afghan economy as the UAE, and for international funding, as long as that funding is safeguarded and there are clear accountability mechanisms so that it can be verified where that money is going. But we all support, both council members and ourselves as the UAE, a dignified life for the Afghan people. There was a second question. Thank you. Oh, the humanitarian. Look, the French-Mexican draft. Look, we've seen now at least two versions of the text, and because the Security Council is a kitchen where things get cooked frequently and there are many pots on the stove, I think there are more additions coming to the text depending on how people will contribute to it. Broadly, we are engaged on the text, we're looking at it, and broadly the UAE is very supportive of anything that will help alleviate humanitarian suffering and safeguard safety for civilians, whether in Ukraine but also around the world. And let's not forget the millions of people around the world in situations in Africa, in the Middle East, in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, who also need our attention very much as a Security Council, in Afghanistan. We've got our eye on all of those crises, and we'll do our best as President of the Council to conduct the work of the Council in an impactful and efficient way, trying to build bridges where divisions exist, because I think the international community really needs that kind of a bridge-building approach to diplomacy today. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but this was a really useful exchange, and your questions are always, as always, thought-provoking, and I hope it's the first of many. Thank you. Thank you.